The film begins in 1868, a region called the Quito Mountains, during a time of intense war between the revolutionaries and the imperial government. At that time, the revolutionaries were about to take control of the war and achieve victory until a unit known as the Shinsengumi, led by Saito, arrived. This unit was the ultimate game-changer in wars, primarily due to their strength, but especially because of one man named Himura Kenshin, a legendary samurai warrior with immense skill in wielding a sword. Proof of this was his ability to take down a large group of armed fighters single-handedly in a very short time. Shortly after, the imperial forces emerged victorious in the war and raised the emperor's flag. Kenshin, overjoyed, told himself that a new era had finally begun and the war was over. However, Saito called out to Kenshin by the name Batosai and told him that it wasn't over yet. Men like them were meant to live and die only by the sword. But Kenshin glanced at him briefly, refused to fight, plunged his sword into the ground, and walked away. When night fell, a person who was presumed dead rose again from among the corpses, bewildered at how he was still alive. As he began to walk away, he noticed the sword Batosai had thrust into the ground and realized it was his own. The story then shifts to 1878 Tokyo. The Imperial Army general gathered his military unit before him and declared that over the past 10 years, Japan had become a powerful nation and entered a new era. He praised his soldiers for bringing security and safety to the country, stating that the age of fear and violence had finally ended. Meanwhile, a corrupt wealthy man named Takeda gathered a group of his doctors. He congratulated them on inventing a new type of opium, having discovered its ability to turn weak people into monsters. He then dismissed them, but as they were leaving, he locked the last two inside, while letting the others leave. It was revealed that he did this to eliminate the remaining doctors through his guards, and he also made it clear that he needed only one person who knew the secret formula. The group outside proceeded to kill all the doctors, and just as Takeda announced that he would choose the girl named Megumi to live, the other doctor ran and jumped out the window to save himself. The next day, a celebration was taking place in the city, and Kenshin had just arrived. He began walking through the market, extremely happy and delighted by the atmosphere around him. Saito was at the scene of a murdered police officer in the street. Next to the body was a message from Batosai, explaining the reason for the killing, along with his signature. However, Saito was certain that Batosai was not the one behind it, as it was not his style of killing. Let's return to Kenshin, who, while walking, noticed a government notice with a picture of someone who looked like him. It was written that this was Batosai, the killer from the Kamiya dojo. Suddenly, a girl named Kaoru attacked him because she thought he was the Batosai the government was looking for. He dodged her strike and told her he wasn't the person she was searching for, that he was just a wanderer who wanted no trouble. At that point, the girl calmed down a bit but told him there was a decree that no one should walk the streets with a sword. However, he explained that the edge of his sword was reversed, meaning it couldn't kill anyone. She then apologized for what she had done and left. A little later, Officer Saito went to see Takeda and showed him the message found next to the murdered officer, which was signed by Batosai. But Takeda said, "Batosai died in the war 10 years ago. Does this mean his ghost has returned to kill people again?" Saito then said, "You are definitely involved in this matter. I will be watching you until I arrest you," and left. As soon as Takeda entered his palace, his assistant informed him that Megumi had escaped. Another one of his subordinates told him that the corrupt officer on their payroll had sent a message that Megumi was at the police station. Takeda was very annoyed and said, "Since Megumi has reached the point of going to the police station, it's hard to predict what she might tell them." Therefore, he ordered the ninja fighters under his command to go get her. But another person named Jinei said, "I will take care of her." Takeda warned him, "Be careful. She is the only one who knows the secret of the opium. Don't mess this up, Batosai." Meanwhile, at the police station, Megumi suddenly sensed great unrest. All the officers inside began running around in panic because they had learned that Batosai had arrived at the station and was mercilessly killing everyone there. Megumi quickly fled the place, knowing he had come specifically for her. Batosai finished off everyone present, but noticed that Megumi had escaped. At the same time, Kaoru was walking in the street when she was surprised to see a police officer stumbling along. Suddenly, he fell off the bridge while walking. Immediately afterward, Batosai passed by, and Kaoru saw him. She recognized him as the person on the wanted poster and asked, "Are you Batosai? Why do you say you're from the Kamiya dojo?" We then learn that because Batosai was attributing his actions to the dojo that Kaoru's father left to her, she heard the dojo's reputation had been ruined, and it was forced to close because of him. At that moment, Batosai descended toward her and attacked. Kaoru was utterly defenseless against him, and he even wounded her arm with his sword. He was about to finish her off when Kenshin arrived just in time, swiftly pulling her away from Batosai's blade. He said to her, You forgot your handkerchief with me, Batosai asked him. Who are you? Kenshin replied. It doesn't matter who I am. But tell me, why are you using the name Batosai? The moment the imposter noticed the scar on Kenshin's face, he said, So you're the one everyone's talking about? Suddenly, the police arrived at the scene. Kenshin quickly took Kaoru and fled before they could be caught. They reached the dojo that belonged to Kaoru's father, and she thanked him for saving her life. She explained that many people used to come to the dojo to train with her father, but ever since Batosai appeared, leaving messages with the corpses claiming he was from the Kamiya dojo, no one had come anymore. That's why she wanted to eliminate him, so people would return to the dojo. But Kenshin told her, if I were you, I wouldn't have done that, just so you know. Kaoru was surprised by his words, and he continued, that person is much stronger than you. In any fight you pick, you must know your limits, so you don't lose your life. She retorted, you're just a wanderer on the street, you wouldn't understand how I feel. Kenshin was hurt by her words but said, if your father were here, he wouldn't have allowed his daughter to sacrifice her life for the dojo. Then he left. Meanwhile, Takeda was extremely frustrated because they had failed to capture Megumi. The next day, a child named Yahiko arrived at Kaoru's dojo and said, this orphan needs a hot meal, but she scolded him, saying, we train first, then you can eat. At the same time, a group of gang members arrived at the dojo. They told Kaoru that they wanted to buy the dojo, and that a nobleman would pay a good price for it. Kaoru refused, saying, I won't sell the dojo. The gang leader insisted, this dojo is as good as closed, no one comes here anymore. He ordered his men to wreck the place. They began vandalizing the dojo, even breaking the sign with her father's name, and they mocked her relentlessly. Suddenly, one of the gang members was sent flying out of the dojo. When the others rushed out to see what was happening, Kaoru was surprised to see the wanderer named Kenshin standing there. He said to the gang members, when Miss Kaoru told you that the sword is meant for protecting life, not for taking it, she said that because her hands are still clean of blood. But anyway, you are right, the sword is meant for killing. The gang members mocked his words and laughed at him. But then, Kenshin began attacking them with immense strength. He fought them using only his hands, not drawing his own sword, to honor the dojo's principles. Despite being heavily outnumbered, and against armed opponents, none of them could lay a hand on him. He then picked up a wooden practice sword, and began taking down every one of them, one after another, with effortless precision. After overpowering everyone, one of the gang members, enraged, tried to kill him. But with a single strike, Kenshin sent him flying far away from the dojo. At that moment, the police arrived at the scene, and arrested everyone present for carrying swords, which was prohibited in the city. To prevent Kaoru from facing consequences for what happened, Kenshin informed the police that everything was his fault, and that the dojo had nothing to do with it. The police were forced to arrest him, and took him to jail. The next day, while Kenshin was in his cell, someone said to him, that X-shaped scar on your face isn't unfamiliar to me. When he looked up, he saw Officer Saito, who immediately said, long time no see, Batosai. Saito ordered the guard to release him from the cell, took him, and left the place. He then brought him to General Yamagata. The moment General Yamagata saw him, he said, where have you been hiding all these years? He went on to explain the issue of the opium spreading throughout the country, mentioning that merchants were selling it everywhere. The problem was that addiction to this opium was even worse than to regular opium. They were certain that those manufacturing it had bigger plans beyond just opium. The general warned that if the situation continued, the country would be ruined. He asked Kenshin to join their army to help, and said, I want you to use those two hands of yours for something useful. But Kenshin, the real Batosai, replied, I've left the past behind, and don't want to kill anyone again. At that, everyone mocked him. They asked, how do you expect to defend the emperor without killing? Saito added, even your sword is useless now. If you had to defend yourself, could your sword protect you? Then, Saito grabbed his own sword, and launched a fierce attack on Batosai. However, Batosai only defended himself and refused to counterattack. Because his sword was reverse-bladed, Saito managed to wound him in the shoulder. Eventually, the general ordered Saito to stop and let him go. Meanwhile, Megumi was still wandering the streets, trying to avoid Takeda's men. As Yahiko was looking for Kaoru, he bumped into Megumi, and they both fell. She begged him to help her and hide her somewhere. As Batosai was leaving the police station, he saw Kaoru waiting for him. She asked him to come back to the dojo with her since he had nowhere else to go. But he said, you know I was a killer in the past, she replied. All I know is the wanderer Kenshin. We all have things we don't like to talk about. She insisted that he return to the dojo with her. When they arrived, Kaoru was surprised to find Megumi coming out of the bathroom. She asked Yahiko about her, and he said, she was on the street and begged me to bring her here. Megumi greeted them and made herself at home, as if she owned the place. When night fell, Kaoru asked Megumi again, who are you, and what are you doing here? But once again, Megumi refused to tell her anything. At that moment, Takeda arrived at the scene. The moment Megumi saw him, she quickly stood up to hide. Meanwhile, Takeda approached Batosai and asked, "So, you're the one who saved the dojo from 10 fighters this morning?" He added, "I'm a businessman working in trade," and offered him a very large sum of money in exchange for working with him. But Batosai refused the offer. Takeda couldn't believe he would refuse, and kept saying, "Who would turn down an amount like this? The era we live in runs on money." Just then, one of the men who had been in jail entered and said, "I'm a street fighter, and I'm broke. I want you to hire me," Takeda replied. "And do you deserve this money? Or are you all talk?" The man said. "If the legendary Batosai wants to test me, I'm ready." Everyone was shocked to learn that Batosai was right there with them. The fighter went up to him and told Takeda, "If I defeat him, hire me." But Batosai said, "The restaurant will get damaged like this. Let's fight outside." The moment they stepped out, the man revealed a very large weapon and said, "Be careful, this is a great artifact over 400 years old. But don't worry, it has no edge now because I haven't used it in a long time." He began directing his weapon toward Batosai, but the latter dodged his strikes with ease. To avoid fighting, Batosai ran away, but the man chased after him, taunting, "The most dangerous killer, Batosai, is running away like this?" He cornered him, but Batosai continued evading every attack. Eventually, he jumped to the other side of the river, but the fighter followed, still eager to fight. Batosai managed to pin the man's weapon to the ground, and the man lifted it, throwing Batosai off. Batosai asked him, "Is it natural for someone like you to serve a man like that?" The fighter thought for a moment and said, "Forget it, I won't serve him." He ordered everyone to return to their places. Kaoru took Batosai so they could go back to finish their meal. From that point on, the imposter Batosai began committing even more murders, especially targeting police officers, to prove he was the real Batosai. While Saito was at the scene of the murdered officers, he went to Batosai and said, "The ones who did this were the men who attacked you at the dojo. If you had killed them then, these officers wouldn't have died." At that moment, Batosai saw a grieving daughter mourning her father and remembered the past from 14 years ago, when he used to kill people exactly like the imposter Batosai, leaving behind messages stating the reason for execution. We learn that the scar on his face came from a man Batosai tried to kill, but who survived the first attempt and managed to wound him in the face. As Batosai stood there lost in painful memories, Kaoru came looking for him because she was afraid he had left her, but he smiled at her and reassured her, letting her know he was hungry and wanted to eat. Meanwhile, Takeda had purchased a shipment of new weapons and was very pleased with them. He decided to build a tunnel under the dojo he owned and expand the opium operation, distributing it to all the neighboring countries. Shortly after, one of Takeda's guards approached Megumi at the dojo and warned her, "You're involved with us in the opium business, be careful." He told her to watch her back, then left. A little later, as they were all sitting down to eat, a family brought their daughter to the dojo. The girl was very sick, and to make matters worse, all the doctors in the city had disappeared. Megumi rushed to the well, drank from it, and confirmed that Takeda's assistant, who had warned her, had poisoned all the water in the area. The biggest problem was that all the families in the area were bringing their children, and they were all sick with the same symptoms. Megumi realized it was rat poison. They all needed to vomit to expel the poison from their bodies. She urgently ordered them to bring water quickly, but not from the well outside so they could save them in time. Fortunately, they managed to save the children, and after a short while, everyone was fine. Meanwhile, when Batosai went to Megumi to ask who she really was, someone at the dojo recognized her as a member of the Takani family, a very famous family of doctors. It was widely believed that the entire family had died in the war, but it became clear that their only daughter had survived. Megumi then confided everything to Batosai, how her family died in the war, how she ended up working for Takeda and manufacturing opium, and how she now deeply regretted destroying so many lives. When night fell, Batosai decided to go to Takeda, to put an end to him, and free the city and its people from his evil. But the fighter, Sagara, approached him and warned that Takeda had nearly 250 samurai guards, so, Sagara decided to join him and help in the battle ahead. As they were leaving, Kaoru called out to Batosai, and informed him that Megumi had left and gone to Takeda. He was deeply upset because she was putting her life in danger. Yahiko also insisted on joining the fight, but Batosai told him, "Stay here and protect the dojo and Kaoru." By then, Megumi had arrived at Takeda's mansion. The guards immediately brought her in when they saw her. The moment she faced Takeda, he said, "I knew you'd come back. Anyway, you need to start working again first thing tomorrow." But she cut him off and said, "I'm done making opium." He asked, "Then why are you here?" She replied, "To kill you," and pulled out a knife, wounding him. She was about to finish him when one of his guards saved him, and another began beating and yelling at her for attempting to kill Takeda. Just then, they heard a loud noise outside. The imposter Batosai announced, "He's here." At that moment, Batosai and Sagara had arrived and launched a fierce attack on Takeda's ninja fighters. The two of them fought relentlessly, taking down one enemy after another. None of Takeda's men stood a chance against them. Takeda then appeared at the window, holding Megumi hostage, and began throwing large amounts of money at his men, ordering them to eliminate Batosai and Sagara. The beast within Batosai awakened, and he and Sagara intensified their assault until they had defeated all the fighters below. When they entered the mansion to confront Takeda, they were met by one of his personal guards, who asked, "Which one of you shall I fight first?" Sagara stepped forward and said, "I'll be the one to fight you." He asked Batosai to go search for Megumi immediately. Then, he and the guard engaged in an intense battle, exchanging fierce blows. Meanwhile, as Batosai moved forward, he encountered another one of Takeda's guards, who asked him, "Is she really worth all this trouble to save?" Batosai replied, "Everyone deserves a chance. Anyone worth saving should be saved." But the guard tricked Batosai, setting a trap that bound his legs with ropes. Sagara was still locked in his intense fight with the other guard, but began to lose strength as his opponent gained the upper hand. At the same time, the guard above started firing at Batosai while he was hanging. Just as the rope snapped, Batosai swiftly dodged the bullets, and within seconds, dropped down to confront the guard. A fierce battle broke out between them. Despite everything Takeda and his men threw at him, Batosai fought with his reverse-bladed sword, refusing to kill anyone. Meanwhile, Sagara and his opponent were fighting in the kitchen when Sagara suddenly stopped and said, "Wait." He picked up a chicken from the floor and began eating it, even offering some to the other man. But the guard said he was vegetarian, so Sagara gave him a radish instead. They ate and drank, and then resumed their fight. Back with Batosai, the battle continued. Though the guard's moves were extremely fast, he couldn't land a killing blow due to Batosai's own speed. Batosai was somewhat frustrated fighting with a reverse-bladed sword, but still managed to gain the upper hand. He delivered a swift strike aimed at the guard's face, but still refused to kill him, only cutting him below the eye. The guard, provoked, yelled, "Do you really think you can end this fight with that reverse-bladed sword?" He charged again, but Batosai wounded him in the legs, and then delivered a severe blow to his arm, knocking him to the ground. At the same time, Sagara finally overpowered his opponent, landing several powerful hits before finishing him with a decisive move. They continued their path to reach Takeda, but as they tried to open the door, they were met with a barrage of gunfire. Takeda was using the new weapon he had just purchased. The two realized they couldn't confront him head-on as long as he wielded that weapon. Sagara tried to charge in, but Takeda fired at him and nearly finished him off. Just then, Officer Saito arrived. Batosai learned that Yahiko had gone to him and reported what was happening. Saito explained that as long as the weapon was firing, Takeda wouldn't be able to change its direction. So, Sagara tricked Takeda by pretending to surrender, raising both hands in the air. Batosai also entered and placed his sword on the ground, acting as if they had given up. Takeda arrogantly demanded, "Bow and beg for mercy, you dogs." Suddenly, Sagara pulled out an egg and threw it right into Takeda's face. In the chaos, each of them ran in different directions, successfully distracting him. Saito seized the moment, leaped up, and knocked the chandelier onto Takeda, forcing him away from his weapon. As Takeda tried to get up, he found Batosai standing over him, sword pointed at his head. Saito said to Batosai, "Go now. I'll take care of this coward." So Batosai and Sagara quickly left the scene. He arrived at the place where Megumi was being held and freed her. However, the problem was that she urgently told him, "Hurry to Kaoru, she's in danger right now." At the same time, the imposter Batosai had found Kaoru and taken her with him. The next day, as soon as Kaoru woke up, she found herself tied up in the middle of the forest. Within minutes, Batosai arrived, and the imposter kept provoking him, trying to force him to fight with all his strength to prove who the real Batosai was. He even went as far as hitting Kaoru right in front of him to provoke him further. The imposter leaped into the air and descended with full force, aiming to kill Batosai. He managed to wound him in the arm, yet Batosai continued fighting with his reverse-bladed sword. During the battle, Batosai struck a powerful blow that knocked the imposter's sword from his hand, but the imposter caught it with his other hand and managed to inflict a severe wound on Batosai's stomach. He continued attacking until he gained the upper hand, and even sent Batosai flying backward. Mockingly, the imposter said, "After all this, you still haven't gotten angry? You're nothing like the Batosai from back then." He then used his dark technique to take control of Kaoru and began choking her. "You have only 2 minutes to save her," he taunted. At that moment, Batosai erupted into action, lunging forward and slashing the imposter across the face with his sword. He demanded, "Release your hold on her if you value your life." But the imposter replied, "You have 2 options. Either she breaks free on her own, or you kill me." Enraged, Batosai launched a fierce assault. However, the imposter was not an easy opponent, and managed to overpower Batosai, stabbing him in the shoulder with a knife and pinning him to the ground. Batosai rose again, and the two engaged in a brutal exchange until Batosai finally gained the advantage. He struck the impostor on the head with the back of his sword with such force that it nearly cracked his skull. Then, using a secret technique, he slashed with the sword in one direction and struck with the scabbard in the other, breaking the impostor's arm. Because of this technique, Batosai realized the impostor would never be able to wield a sword again. Batosai decided to break the vow he had made to himself and kill once more for Kaoru's sake. But at the last moment, Kaoru broke free from the mind control and begged him not to return to killing, pleading, "Stay as the Kenshin I know." Meanwhile, the impostor, defeated and powerless, chose to take his own life with his sword. Batosai took Kaoru and left the scene, but they encountered Saito. The moment Saito saw him, he remarked, "See where your refusal to kill has brought us?" But Batosai remained steadfast to his vow and replied, "Killing breeds hatred, and hatred leads to more killing. To break this cycle, one must wield a sword that does not kill." He then left Saito and walked away. The police arrested Takeda, who went insane upon being captured, along with all his men. Batosai returned to being Kenshin, the man who no longer kills, and resumed his life with Kaoru and Megumi at the dojo.
And that concludes today's film. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for the next summary. Goodbye!